Hello and welcome to episode 18 of the Primary Maths Podcast, the show where we talk all things primary maths. I'm John Cripwell.
And I'm Becky Brown.
And this is the non-interview episode of the show that will go out now on a Friday for the foreseeable. We're going to see how that works. So earlier this week, we had an interview episode which went out on Tuesdays. And now this episode with myself and Becky is going to go out on Friday. And the first episode with myself and Becky was supposed to go out last Friday. But unfortunately, Becky, you weren't very well.
Yeah, got the lurgy this week.
Got the lurgy. And so kindly Sally stepped in. And then unfortunately, some gremlins came along with her. Maybe, I don't know, maybe our recording software also caught the lurgy, Becky. And so that episode didn't unfortunately go out until this week. So this is a bumper 3 episode week. But you know, can't have too much of a good thing, can you?
Triple whammy this week, John. I like it.
Mm-hmm. So how are you now, Becky? You
feeling
well?
Loads better, thank you. Yeah, I think it's this time of year, isn't it? Everybody's picking up all sorts of things from going back into school and the children going back into school. But yes, feeling loads better. Still ever so slightly croaky, but yeah, loads better than I was. Thank you.
Good. I'm slightly croaky as well. I had a sort of a cough that's not quite turned into it. You know, one of those ones that hasn't quite turned into anything, and you sort of think, is this going to get worse or not? Seems to be going away now, but it's just left me a little bit croaky. But it's been a busy few days, busy couple of weeks. I mentioned in the last episode, it felt like I was doing a bit of a tour around the countries. So on Saturday, I was in Cardiff for the Thinking Deeply About Primary Education conference, which was great. Saw some brilliant workshops, some brilliant speakers. One or two I'm hoping are going to come onto the podcast, so I'm excited about that as well. And then I ran a workshop on leading sustainable change in schools, which was great as well. And thank you to everybody that came along to that too. So yeah, it was good fun. And then I've also been recording content for an upcoming Twinkle professional development course on EYFS maths, and one with Pete Mattock, who was on the podcast a few weeks ago, and we're talking about maths anxiety on that one.
So
and
you've
then,
been
Becky,
super
week,
busy.
well, I haven't even got to the pinnacle yet because
Okay.
I think I might retire at this point. Last week, I was part of a team running a Teach Meet, which is Twinkle's free webinars for professional development and things. If you see them, they're totally free. You can sign up. If you're a Twinkle Ultimate member, I think you can go and look at the archive of all the past ones as well. They're all on there. And there's some brilliant ones, not just about maths, about everything really that you could think of with school. I know you've done a few in the past as well, Becky, and we've got one coming up on bar modelling, I think.
We
is
have
that October or November?
November, yes.
November.
It's coming up in November, John. But yes, I do love to run a Teach Me, and it's lovely for people to come. But great that people can catch up if they aren't able to make it, because we're all very busy.
Absolutely. But last week I ran a Teach Me with one of our colleagues, Alice Walker, who is on the PSHE side of things, and it was all about financial education and integrating financial education into the curriculum with our special guests, Ant and Dec. So who I was, there's my claim to fame now. Unfortunately, I was too busy to record with them in person, so they had to pre-record their little bit. I know. I know they were gutted, and
they will be gutted that they missed out on that opportunity, John.
Ant and Dec, I apologise again that I couldn't be there with you, but no, that was fun. So there's a little highlight of my career. I'm on some PD with Ant and Dec, so feel free to go and have a look at that. It's all to do with our partnership, of course, with Santander. Really raising the profile of financial education and trying to see how we can integrate it into lessons without taking away from everything else, which is always the sort of balancing act, isn't it? But lots of great tips in there from Alice, and maybe a couple from myself as well.
Great, that's it now, John. You've made it.
That's it now. Yep.
You can retire now.
You'll be flying solo on this, I'm afraid, from now on. I am going off to co-host Saturday Night Takeaway and Britain's Got Talent, I think. Yeah,
Love it.
why not? So, failing that though, I better carry on with this just in case that doesn't quite materialise. We've had an email this week, which I'm really pleased to see, given that the episode they're referring to only came out as we're recording this yesterday. So it's lovely. So I'll read it out to you, Becky. It says, "Hi, John." Actually, it says Joe, but I'm assuming she means John. Hi, John, Becky, and Sally. I really enjoyed this week's episode where you discussed spatial reasoning. It stuck out to me particularly because at our school, I run forest school sessions, and I can see lots of the links that you talked about. I teach in a primary school just outside Sheffield, and one of the things I notice every week or every time I run the session is how much the children's spatial awareness develops when they're outside. So, Becky, we talked about the link between spatial reasoning and attainment in maths, and how the impact of playing outside, as well as other things like reading independently and things, has a huge impact on spatial reasoning, which then has a huge impact on maths.
Mhm.
And in particular, this was on the back of my visit to Glasgow to the Turner Kirk Centre. In particular, the ability to visualize the structure of the maths, I think, really, which comes from that spatial awareness and spatial reasoning. So Emma, who sent in this email, says when they're climbing trees or balancing on logs or just running around on the different terrain, they're constantly judging different distance and angles, etc. And then she goes on to say the same goes for when they're building dens. You can almost see them visualizing what a structure might look like before they put it together and then negotiating. I can totally imagine that, negotiating with each other and explaining it to each other, testing ideas, rotating branches, etc., before they lift them. And Emma goes on to say that she thinks that forest school links brilliantly with PE and other outdoor play. Totally agree, Emma. She'd love to hear our thoughts on how we can better connect those experiences with what happens back in the classroom. And she also says, and this is why I read it out, thanks for the podcast. It's given me lots to think about. So that's Emma Johnson. Thank you very much, Emma, for getting in touch.
Yeah.
We'll come to your question. If anybody does want to get in touch, it's primary maths podcast at twinkle.co.uk, twinkle without an E. But yeah, it was lovely to hear from you, Emma. Thank you.
That is great. Thank you, Emma. I think we do always, don't we, try to be in the classroom and try to give maths a context, but maybe we're doing it the wrong way round, actually. Maybe we should be providing those opportunities for contextualized maths of life, if you like, before we go to sitting in the classroom rather than the other way around. I think, taking children outside, forest school is fabulous, isn't it? I mean, unfortunately, there's not enough of it. But I do remember doing Den Day. I think Den Day might still be a thing. And we had whole year groups out on the field building dens. And it was very interesting. Interesting because you do see all that visualization, all that maths and other things, but also very interesting to see how many children hadn't built dens before or weren't used to doing it. And actually, I think we've lost a little bit of that, haven't we, in today's society? And you can't go out and play maybe as freely as you used to. But definitely trying to bring that context to the classroom can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I was lucky enough. Where I grew up was in a suburban area of Derby, leafy suburban, but still, built up in terms of housing and things. But I was next to what is now the big super hospital in Derby, helicopters landing on it and all sorts. But back then was quite a small maternity hospital with lots of sort of land around it that just wasn't being used, and part of that was sort of woodland. And so I spent days and weeks of my childhood probably just messing about up there with my mates and building dens and that sort of thing. My daughters don't get the chance to do that sort of thing really
No.
at all. When we go to National Trust places and things like that, sometimes they have places where you can build dens and things, don't they? But it is fascinating. One of the things that came out of the research as well was that even on a smaller scale, things like building construction with bricks and interconnecting bricks multicolored bricks that sometimes come with instructions. That can be really helpful in the same way as well. So it's not just about the gross motor skills. That those sort of fine motor skills are important too. But just going back to den building for a moment, because as you were saying that, Becky, it reminded me of a team building day that we did as a staff at school probably 10 years ago, and we had to build dens before we could cook our lunch. We went to this outdoor centre thing, and there were activities like, having to make a bridge to cross an imaginary stream and things like that. But one of the things was you've got to transport your logs and things to the site where you're going to build your den, then make a fire, and then you can cook your lunch. I honestly thought some people were never going to have their lunch that day.
No.
It was interesting. We didn't go back, funnily enough, although I
Oh,
loved it. I thought it was great. But yeah, so interesting to see that maths of life, as you say, Becky, and that spatial reasoning, spatial awareness in action. I think in terms of how it links to maths back in the classroom, there's lots of research to say that link doesn't have to be explicit, actually, in terms for it to have a positive impact. And it's not only on areas of maths that you might think, like shape and space and volume and those sorts of things. It can have an impact right across the curriculum. So I don't think it's necessarily about making those links back in the classroom. It's just making sure that the children that we have in our classes have that breadth of experience that allows them to have those opportunities to learn more about spatial reasoning. And the program that they're putting in place in Scotland isn't to replace maths lessons. It's somehow, this is the tricky bit, it's somehow in addition to your normal maths lesson, and it's not really a maths lesson, it is a spatial reasoning lesson. 16 of them a year. So it's not really about necessarily making those links with maths. It's just interesting that the maths attainment increases anyway. I'm hoping that Dr. Jack Parkinson and Professor Quinton Cutts might actually come on the podcast to talk to us about this. So we can
that would be
put your
great.
question to them, Emma, and see what they have to say. So yeah, fingers crossed for that one.
Yeah, thank you for getting in touch, Emma. It's lovely to have emails, John, to share on the show. And hopefully Emma's listening and somebody else might send in a question for next week.
Yeah, that'd be great. Please do.
So this week's Tuesday episode featured an interview with Georgina Durant, our National Education Lead for Inclusion here at Twinkle, and we'll discuss the takeaways from that a little later.
And just a reminder, if you are enjoying the show, and who wouldn't, and you want to catch every episode, we'd love it if you followed or subscribed on your favourite platform or on all of them. As I've mentioned before, Becky, that helps too. And
Absolutely.
as I've mentioned, you can drop us an email at primarymathspodcast@twinkle.co.uk or leave a YouTube comment if you'd like to get in touch. We'd love to hear from you.
So, John, what maths has been happening in your life this week? Have you had time to do a little bit of life in between all the work you've been doing this week?
the life just continues happening, Becky, around all of the work somehow. And this was just last night, actually. I was at my daughter's netball match. So netball has taken over our life in the last sort of 18 months or so. And I was standing on, well, that's not true. I was sitting on the sidelines, actually. They put little school benches out for us because they play in a secondary school sports hall. So back on a school bench. And I was sat there with some of the other parents, and we noticed, it was quite obvious, there was quite a height discrepancy between our girls' team and the opposition. I think the opposition were probably a couple of school years younger than our girls' team. And so in netball, obviously, that does give quite an advantage, if you
Yeah.
can pass it over somebody's head without them being able to intercept it. And one dad, Drew, who I chat to quite often, he mentioned that when his daughter was born, she was in the 90th centile for length. Of course, immediately, I thought, aha, here's some maths of life. Thank you for that, because I didn't know what I was going to talk about this week. And so I went off down yet another little rabbit hole, Becky, of history, because it turns out there's quite a bit of history and a fair bit of maths hiding behind that throwaway line. And
Of
the
course.
the measures in the red baby book. I'm assuming it's still red. Certainly for our two girls, it was a red baby book that we were given from the hospital. So we're going back to the 1800s to start with a Belgian statistician called Adolf Kittelet. Um, I had to Google how to say his name because it's not spelt Kittelet, Ketele maybe. But he was fascinated by finding, as a statistician, finding the average sort of person, the average man. And he collected measurements of soldiers and ended up inventing various things, including the body mass index, BMI, which is a mixed legacy, I guess, in terms of usefulness. BMI, yeah, it's been used a lot. People
Yeah.
probably have heard of it in terms of, weight and height and things like that. Um, on the back of his work came along another chap called Cole Pearson, who formalized the idea of percentiles, which he saw as a way of slicing up data so that you could not just see the average, but also where an individual was within that data set, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
And then in the 1920s, doctors decided to start applying this to babies. And the Carnegie study in the US measured around 500 white middle class infants. And those numbers became the basis of growth charts worldwide, which was great, but not exactly representative
No.
in the data. However, it took another 40 odd years for anything to change around that. And in the 1960s, James Tanner in the UK led huge studies of British children, creating the first modern growth charts, which was a big step forward, but still quite narrow.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until the early 2000s, believe it or not, when the World Health Organization finally stepped in and they gathered data from nearly 9,000 children across 6 countries, from Norway to Oman, all raised in what they defined as ideal conditions. And those results became the international growth charts that we use today. And the UK adopted them in 2009. And that's what your health visitor is plotting when they tell you your baby's on the 25th or the 90th centile. If they're on the 90th centile, that means that they are longer than 90% of the babies that were on that data set. So that's where that comes from.
Wow. And
Yeah,
only 2009. That seems, I
yeah.
don't know. If you'd asked me to predict, I mean, I'm glad you didn't because it would have been a terribly wrong, but I'd have thought it was way before that. It shows, doesn't it, how long things take to evolve to a point where they're actually really, really useful.
And then how quickly they become just part of everyday life.
Yeah.
Um, so next time you hear somebody talk about being on the 90th centile, just remember behind that single line on the chart is a Belgian polymath, a British statistician, easy for me to say, an American baby cohort from 1929, and thousands of very wriggly infants around the globe. And then the second interesting bit for me, Becky, was that babies, obviously, we don't measure their height, do we? We measure their
It's
length,
length. Yeah.
but it's the same thing. So the health visitor will measure from head to heel, um, and give you a measure of length. But as a child who can stand up, he would also measure from head to heel. But then it becomes a measure of height. It's interesting. It's just how that vocabulary sort of changes, even though you're measuring the same thing. But just
Yeah.
because the baby can't stand up, therefore you can't measure a height, you have to measure the length. So I'm just
Yeah.
thinking about, how important that vocabulary is and how easily it can be misunderstood, I suppose, when we're talking to children, and they're trying to distinguish, do we refer to length or height? Depends whether somebody's lying down or standing up.
Yeah, and actually you could still measure people by their length, couldn't you? I mean, we could still lie down. I mean, that would make for interesting doctor's surgeries where you have to lie down on the floor to be measured, but you could still measure people's length. Might be
Well,
a
you
bit
get the
strange.
same number, wouldn't you?
You
Pretty
would, yeah.
much. I
Yeah.
suppose you might be slightly more compressed if you stand up, possibly, fractionally. But yeah,
Oh, I
you
feel
end
like
up
there's
with
an
the same number.
investigation. There's an
Yeah, yeah,
investigation
yeah.
there, John.
I need a school to do that and find out for me, please. There's an
Yes.
investigation. We're just giving this stuff away now, Becky, free.
Yeah.
But yeah. So last week as well, just to tie this in, we had somebody get in touch to talk about a unit of length called a smoot. And if you get a chance to listen to last week's episode with Sally, Becky, I know you won't have yet, you'll be introduced to a guy called Oliver Smoot, who became himself a unit of measurement. So if you
Great.
want to find out more about him, just have a little listen to last week's, this week's episode that was recorded last week. Complicated. It's episode 16 anyway. Give it a listen.
Will do.
Right. Becky, you have excitingly some etymology for us, I think.
I do. And it was when I was listening to your interview with Georgina, which obviously went out on Tuesday, and it was something that came up from your conversation around the use of language. And specifically, you were talking about the use of precise language and how we will benefit children by expecting and modeling that language, and listening along and thinking, well, actually, that the language in particular that you were using, we were thinking about subtrahend and minuend and addend and dividend. And we could go further and start talking about other ones as well. But I noticed that they were all in the same sort of bracket of words.
Ooh,
They all had
yeah.
the same ending. So I thought, well, I wonder if looking back at the etymology of those words might help us a little bit, because I do appreciate that sometimes for adults it can be difficult to know which to use when and so on. So I looked them up. And I learned something this week, John, because I learned about a gerundive, which is a form of Latin verb. I might have learned about it in my Latin learning days, but it had gone out of my head. Obviously, wasn't a piece of important information. But they all come from Latin. You won't be surprised to hear. And they come from the form of the verb which ends ndus. So although we take the us off the end, so for example, we say minuend, not minuendus, it comes from minuendus. And the gerundive form, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but that's how it's spelt, is that which must be done. So if you take minuend, for example, it's from the Latin verb minuere, which becomes minuendus, which means that which must be made smaller, which makes perfect sense when you put it into a calculation. So that's what a minuend is. The number
so
which
the
must...
subtrahend will be the bit that must be subtracted?
Exactly. Yes. Subtrahendus, that which must be subtracted. So I did think, actually, that does help, I think, because I think those are the two which people could get confused about.
I don't want to sound surprised, Becky, but that is genuinely helpful. Yeah.
I knew this would be helpful, John. Somewhen we would be able to use etymology to help us.
Addendus, that which must be added, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
dividend, the thing that must be divided.
Yes.
Oh, and do you know what, though? Genuinely, if I'd have known this, that's the sort of thing that we can teach to the children, and it just makes a little bit more sense, doesn't it?
Yes.
Becky, you are a genius.
I love how happy you are by that, John. I was happy about it as well.
Yeah, I really am.
And I think, I think dividend, before I was a teacher, the only time I'd ever come across it used to be on an old community chest card in Monopoly. Bank pays you dividend of £50, which doesn't actually help, because I don't think that helps with the understanding. But by looking a little bit deeper, I thought, actually, this makes perfect sense and could be quite useful in remembering how the words work and what they mean.
So I think of dividends as in shares in a company, because of background in company law and things. And so I would think of a dividend as something that you receive. So I think with shares and payouts and things like that, actually you shouldn't be referring to them as dividends, should you? You should be referring to them as quotients, really. That bit that you get after the profit has been divided.
Yeah.
Interesting.
There you go. So there's your etymology for this week, John. Very closely linked to your conversation with Georgina as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. I like it when you tie things together like that, Becky. It's very nice.
It's almost like I planned it.
Almost, yeah. It's almost like we have some sort of roadmap for this. But any regular listeners will know that's absolute rubbish.
No.
So, Let's move on to Georgina's interview then, if we can, Becky. Huge thank you again to Georgina for joining us and sharing so much of her insights in her interview this week.
Yeah, and now it's the part of the show where we can really dig into those key takeaways from your interview with Georgina and talk about things that listeners might want to try out in their own school or practice.
Yeah, absolutely. So we did have a couple of questions on the back of this. One was a YouTube comment. I think I had another one from TikTok as well. So you can find these things on YouTube and TikTok. Find us on there as well. Instagram too. So I had a just before we get into any of your takeaways, Becky, there was a question from Sarah who teaches in year 5. She says she's got a pupil who just totally freezes if I ask them to explain their maths out loud. On paper, they're fine, but the second I cold call them, it's panic stations. Any tips for helping them to feel more confident?
That's
So this Becky, I think, was Georgina did talk about this. She sort of said that she felt the same. That was her as a pupil at school.
Yeah, she mentioned cold calling, didn't she? Actually, I noted that down, John. I think it's an interesting one because I think often we find it the other way around, that children can talk about their maths but maybe can't write it down. So it's great that Sarah's pupil is able to write it because it does show that they've got an understanding. Um, Cold calling is interesting, isn't it? Because I think we have sort of moved away from, I mean, it may look random to an observer, but I think we do tend to use more targeted questioning now, don't we, when we're teaching, and really think about who we're asking and what, or we try to where possible. Um,
Yeah,
I think there's a real place for, and I think this probably happens in most maths classrooms, for making sure that you've got that opportunity to practice your talking before you start sharing it in front of a class. Um, and you could argue that actually, if somebody can talk to a partner about it, do they actually need to be able to share it with the class? Not necessarily. So I think having that partner talk or group talk, building confidence in talking first is probably a really good way to get around that sort of fear of talking in front of everybody.
yeah, no, I totally agree. And I would come back to why are you, as the teacher, what is the purpose of nothing? No fundamental issue with cold calling per se, but what's the purpose of it? Are you trying to check for understanding in the moment, or are you, trying to share something with the rest of the class? Because I would only use that if I'd already had opportunity to go around and see who was understanding it, and then I might ask them to explain it to the rest of the class. Because as the teacher, I already know that they've got that understanding. If you
Yeah.
see what I mean, I wouldn't really be just calling out people in class. I'm sure that's not what Sarah's doing, but um, just what is the purpose of the cold calling? Could it be something that's served better by mini whiteboards, or just
Hmm.
explaining it in their books, or as you say, Becky, just talking to a partner and then asking for volunteers who might explain it to the rest of the class, depending on what the purpose of that question is in the first place.
Yeah. I quite like when they've done talk partners to ask them to explain what their partner said rather than
Yes.
themselves. Because even if they then give their own answer, you're almost like giving them a bit of a get out. Because if it wasn't quite right, it's not their answer, it was their partner's, and you can discuss it that way. So that's quite a nice way to get around it.
Shift the blame. That's
Yeah.
what I'm all about. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Um, we also had a comment from a maths lead called Tom, who says that he'd love to work more closely with his Senko, but they're both totally snowed under, and I can completely imagine that. There's not enough time in the day, as we know. And he asks, what's one quick win we could try to make this term to make maths a bit more inclusive?
Great question, John, because yeah, people in schools, everybody in school is so busy, but I've never known anyone work harder than a Senko, to be quite honest with you. So yeah, finding time together. Um, I don't know if this is controversial or not. Something which I think improves inclusivity and just general maths mastery teaching is mixing them up. I think we are very, Georgina talked about this a little bit as well, didn't she? About making assumptions about particular groups of children. I think flexible groupings, mixed groupings is a really, really good way to not only support children who maybe need a little bit of support and might benefit from hearing it from a peer and not a teacher all the time or another adult, but also really encouraging those children. It's not a case of those children just helping another child. It's really giving them the opportunity to practice that language. And we know that if you can teach somebody something, you've got a really good understanding of it yourself. So I think I think it's scary. I think teachers are scared of it, mixing up. And I think you have to do it very, very carefully.
Well, that was the thing, Becky. So I think there can be a place occasionally for random groups, but I think much more effective is if you've thought carefully about those pairings, and they don't have to stay the same all the time, as you say. Ha- but just going back to, if you remember from your teacher training days, Becky, a little bit of Vygotsky and his zone of proximal development,
Yes.
but making sure that the gap isn't too wide in attainment and understanding between two pupils that are sat next to each other, because neither will necessarily get a huge amount of benefit from that.
Yeah.
But if there's a little bit of a gap in understanding and a little bit of and yeah, a knowledge gap, I suppose, then that can be really beneficial for both pupils. And it's not cheating on the part of the pupil who perhaps is just being a little less quick to grasp something. That there's a genuine support there in place to help them to understand. And as
Yeah.
you say, from the other people who might be providing that support, I became a much better mathematician by teaching the subject than I ever was by just learning it.
Yeah.
So I think there is definitely equal benefit there. So I totally agree, Becky. I think
Yeah. And
thinking really carefully about your seating plan, and not, sometimes in primary classrooms, I think we can get a bit fixated on a seating plan for behaviour, or sometimes seating plans are put in place for English, and we sort of see that as the seating plan for every other, area of
yeah.
the curriculum. But I think there's definitely an argument for having a maths seating plan that's carefully thought about.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I use the term mixed ability, which I try to avoid using really, but I'm not just thinking about maths attainment either. If you've got somebody who's really confident, it's like going back to Sarah's question, at talking about their maths, and someone who's maybe less confident, then that might be a good pairing as well. So yeah, I think getting those pairings right can take a little while,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I've seen it pay off, and I think that sort of paired work can be really effective.
Yeah, I can distinctly now in my mind's eye see two children that I put together in my class in year six. One who was very reluctant to explain his thinking, but was very quick to get to a conclusion and to answer a problem. And then his partner was a girl who was also pretty quick at doing her maths, but really struggled with her confidence. And so putting the two of them together just meant that she would ask him to check more often. Am I doing this right? Is this the right way? That it was helpful that they sort of got on before that anyway. But it drew him out of his shell a little bit in terms of talking about what they were doing and why that was the right answer. And yes, you have that reassurance that she needed. To feel more confident in her maths. Now, obviously, it doesn't always work like that, but I do remember thinking at the time, yeah, you've done a good job there. That was
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. No, I do like, and I think the pairings are important, but also how the activities you do are quite important. We used to do an activity called Switch, where they would have one pencil and one book, or one whiteboard and one pen. And then one person would have to be doing it and commentating all the time because, of course, that's so important. And then you would call Switch, and the other person would have to take over, which, of course, meant that that other person couldn't have been looking out the window or daydreaming or thinking about their dinner, but had to sort of have an awareness of what was going on to at least have an attempt to try to carry on. And the class quite enjoyed that one.
See, I did a variation on that, I suppose, where one child would be the scribe, or with manipulatives, would be the person to manipulate the concrete resources. The other person, they wouldn't do anything until the other person told them to do it. So the other person had to actually, say what the partner A would have to say, what partner B had to do, and partner B would do it, and then we would switch as well, so that both of them got turns to take on both roles. And that worked really nicely because it did engage both of them. they both had to think about it, and there were natural conversations that came up if partner B didn't agree with what partner A had told them to do,
Yeah.
So that was good as well. So as you say, thinking about the activity, but also thinking about the pairings too, and how you can make the most of those pairings there. Were there any other takeaways for you, Becky, from that interview?
I think probably the other thing that came up, and very early on, Georgina talked about how she'd got quite far in maths through memorizing. And I think we see that a lot. And we can see children get all the way through primary, and you can think they're brilliant. These children are brilliant at maths. But that when they go into secondary school, they revisit, or you talk to their teachers, and actually it's not quite stayed on that trajectory.
Yeah.
And I think making assumptions is probably a real thing there. I think memory is really important. We know how important it is in freeing cognitive load. If you can recall facts, that's great. But if you've just memorized a lot of things and don't really understand them, there is going to come a point where that maybe makes maths a bit more difficult for you. And I think having conversations with teachers, their biggest things are, oh, well, I'm not going to make that table do that because they can already do it. We really need to try not to make assumptions like that, because you could give children 3 fluency questions. Why not? It will take them a minute. At least you've got your evidence. Yep, you can do it. Trying to make assumptions about children who pick things up quickly can sometimes make them fall down a bit later. So I think just that it all comes down to understerstanding, doesn't it? And making sure we're teaching.
And again, it goes back to what we were just talking about, which is the purpose of the activity. So that purpose might be different for different children within the class, and that's absolutely fine. For one child, it might be that you're checking their understanding. For another child, it might just be retrieval practice. Take it out, using it because we haven't taught rounding since September, and if I don't teach it again until next September, even the person with the best memory in the class might struggle to remember how and why we do these things. So, as you say, that there are multiple purposes for any task that you might decide to give, and just being able to be clear with yourself as a teacher to know, yes, it's fine that they're doing this. Yes, they get the answers right. When did it get to a point, Becky, that we want children to fail in maths? Oh no, we shouldn't have done that. We shouldn't have given that group this work because they can do it. I've never really understood that.
No.
Yes, they've been successful, therefore they haven't learned. I think you can put me on record as that. I think that's absolute rubbish, and I would challenge that. Yes, obviously we want them to be thinking, we want them to be engaged, we want them to be using their skills, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm looking for wrong answers in their books all the time. That to me is not a success.
And I think also, if you've had you could have had a fabulous lesson, you could have had lots of discussion, there might have been failures and misconceptions through that, but by the time they've got into their independent practice, you would probably hope that they were able to complete the work. So I'm with you on that one,
Why
Jon.
are you giving it them?
Yes. Yeah, I'm with you on that one.
Good. I'm glad we're aligned on that. So thank you again to Georgina for your time and your expertise and sharing that with us and our listeners. I think that just about wraps it up for this week, Becky.
Thanks, Jon. If you've enjoyed today's show, please do share it with a colleague. And don't forget, if you give us a quick rating or a review, it helps others stumble across the podcast as well.
Yeah, please do just click that button now. Only takes a second, but it makes a big difference to us. We really appreciate it. We'll be back next Tuesday on the Primary Maths Podcast with another interview, this time focused on the overlap between science and maths with the wonderful Leonie Briggs.
Thank you again for joining us today.
We'll see you next time.